All right, and we should be good. Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining me. Very excited about my guest who's on the channel today. So I'm very glad that everybody is with us. My guest is someone whose work I got into relatively recently. And, one of the things I like about watching all these different commentators on YouTube, all the different people who are making different kind of dissident right content is everybody brings something very different. And Morgoth, when I watch his videos, I always think insightful. I'm always going to get kind of a perspective I hadn't thought of. He's always going to find something that I hadn't really thought about when I watch one of his videos. So I'm really glad that he's on and having a talk today. So Morgoth, thanks for coming on, man. I really appreciate it.
No problem. Nice to be here. Sunday afternoon. My roast is in the oven, and it's nice to have a bit of chat.
Yeah, absolutely, man. And I'm sure, everybody who's watching this is, I'm sure, subscribed to Morgoth. But on the weird case that you aren't, I do have all his links below for his channel and his BitChute and such. So make sure that you're subscribing. If for some reason you have not done that yet, go do that now. But yeah, man, I really wanted to talk to you because you had an interesting take on kind of the decentralized nature of the internet and right-wing populism and what that means for kind of the future of kind of the space that both of us kind of share tangentially. But before we get into that real quick, I always ask people before I get started, because I always want to know, how did you get into YouTube? How did you start making content? What got you interested in kind of sharing your ideas online?
Well, I started off writing comments under the Daily Telegraph, which they went through this strange phase. This is going back about 8 years now. And I was instantly just disgusted by the scale of immigration and a lot of the shady aspects to that. And my first kind of outlet was writing comments under the blog section of the Daily Telegraph. And back in around about 2012, the Telegraph blog section, they went through this weird phase where they pretty much anything went. They actually did have free speech. And it became this sort of hotbed of British nationalism and figures popping up. I mean, I remember guest worker from Majority Rights was there, and that's how I met some of the people that are still on my blog today. Millennial Wars used to lurk around. And eventually, of course, the good times ended, and I ended up opening my blog, which I called Morgoth's Review. And then I just started blogging on cultural events and things. But it became a real strain because I had to work more and more. And over time as well, my blogs became more elaborate and longer. At first, it was just like sort of quick posts. And I started off, if you go back to the YouTube channel, I kind of just started off ranting into the camera what would be a basic blog post, which I didn't have time because of work. And that's kind of like how I entered YouTube. It was because I did Millennial Wars live streams a couple of times, and that was the first time people have heard me speak. And then so I kind of got used to it more, and I realized that it would take me, say, 5 hours to write a blog post, and I could just speak it into the microphone instead, because I used to work like really a lot. And so that's kind of like how I ended up on YouTube. And I try to stick to the same way that I did the blog posts.
Yeah, I'm someone who also, did more. I did journalism and did more writing. But I definitely felt like as I started trying to write things that this was really the medium most people it preferred. I think it's also, a lot of people can, they can listen to it while they're doing things. It allows them to kind of learn and kind of hear content and ideas while they're driving or whatever they have to do around the house, mowing the lawn. And so I think that helps and helps people go through this stuff in ways that a blog, I guess, doesn't in some ways. And like you said, it also makes it easier to kind of get it out the door as well.
I always wanted to have, because back then, in terms of sort of the British nationalist scene, there was really not much else there. But I always wanted it to have a different look and feel than the kind of the standard stuff which was around at the time, which was more old school patriotism. And I know people, you know, I've caused a lot of arguments because of that, but I wanted to sort of, if I wanted to have a specifically pop cultural aesthetic and look and feel to it, and then the ideas would sort of float in under the radar, and people wouldn't have all of these defenses up or these edgy symbols and all of this. It would just be somebody pontificating on the world, you know.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
It was a sort of meta-political experiment in my own little way, without, you know, I don't want to sound too pretentious, but I wanted it to have like a sort of pop cultural feel to it, which it did.
Well, I think you're a good storyteller, and I think it does. As you're watching your videos, you do weave those ideas in gradually, and I think it does work very well. But I wanted to get to one of your videos then, because that's what we came together to talk about a little bit today. You made a video kind of in response to Academic Agent. He was talking about how decentralized the opposition to kind of the cathedral, as we term it, or whatever term you want to use, progressivism, or however we want to name it, how that decentralized opposition makes it hard for them to stamp out every piece of it, and people are seeing more of it because the internet is allowing more and more of this stuff to get through than ever has been able to get through kind of the approved channels beforehand. And I thought you made an interesting point, because I think he's right in many ways, but I think that you kind of talked about how, you know, he and you and like Keith Woods and Distributist are all people who are, you know, kind of in the same area, the same part of the network of kind of opposition to kind of the modern world, to the cathedral. And maybe you guys could agree on enough stuff to kind of get a working system going, but the online right is just fragmented into so many different pieces, which with such disparate ideas, that the idea that it could really form into something that could directly challenge the current kind of liberal theory, just it never quite coalesces. It can never quite come together. Could you go a little more into that for people who may not have seen that video?
Yeah, so if you begin in your immediate, if you think of the internet as a network, which it is, and then you think of the people immediately who you you associate with on Twitter, or what YouTube channels you watch, or what blogs you read, they will then be closest to you on that node, and you can have some degree of agreement with them. And I used Distributist, Keith Woods, and Academic Agent, just because I know it would be interesting to contrast those three. But the problem is, and we're talking about this broad kind of populist movement, which is undermining the authority with, you'd think, the end result of replacing the authority entirely. Now, the problem that you have is that the further away you move from your own node or your own echo chamber, the more the more disagreements pop up. Or, I mean, you did a video on Carl Schmitt's friend-enemy distinction, and AA brought this up as well. So the further out we go, the more that pops up. And a classic one, as a sort of British nationalist, the obvious one would be where we rub up against the classic liberals. So I'll just be blunt about it. I belong to a tribe who have conditions imposed on them, which is destroying us, and we will disappear if things don't change. So if you're an ethno-nationalist, this is where you begin. People may not like it and think it's a bit too materialist, but this is essentially where ethno-nationalists begin. And so for them, and this is why I have the most sympathy with them, is because I find it's morally the best, because they have skin in the game, literally. But what it is that they find themselves, or we find ourselves, in what amounts to an existential crisis. And you tend to see a lot of like horrible stories, say rapes and things like this. And it's because that they see themselves, that's a part of our group. Whereas what we then rub up against is, let's say, the classic liberals will then come in, which is basically civic nationalism. And while they too they don't like the system, they too are populists, they too hate the woke agenda and everything. But then all of a sudden, the first friend-enemy distinction appears, and this leads to endless amounts of energy, which is completely futile in internet flame wars as the two rub up against each other. Now, as I say, in my particular case, I'm obviously more on board with the ethno-nationalists for the simple reason that those principles, these Enlightenment ideas, will be around forever. You can't really kill them entirely because they're in the ether, so to speak. Whereas the flesh and blood people can't be replaced. It's a bad way to put it because that's what's happening. But they aren't replaceable. They are there and they are being attacked. And I don't really want to get into the ideologies themselves. I just want to say that so what we have here is a major fault line, and we're all under the umbrella of populism, but we then have the problem that nothing can actually come out of it. Or where is the common ground? What are we going to compromise on? And I mean, before I got banned on Twitter, I would see these sort of squishy Tory types just relentlessly attacking patriotic alternative. So, and then they then respond, and there's a back and forth, and it's all of this energy is being soaked up. And so you can then go further out again across all of the internet. I mean, I was looking on BitChute the other day, and if you looked at the top trending videos on BitChute, which, but these days that gets you a lot of views on BitChute, it's doing well. But it was all about the American election, and you get China and the Satanists rigged the election, or you get it's the Freemasons, or it's a certain other ethnic group. And video after video is all talking about how all of these secret plans, and then it's George Soros in cahoots with the Chinese and the Satanists, and it all amounts to this sort of grey porridge of like incomprehensible mush. And I often think to myself, just as a little tangent, most of the people who watch that stuff will be Americans. And I think even if that was the case, even if, let's just say the Chinese and the Satanists were in cahoots to rig the American election, where does that leave you? What is your response as a basic patriotic classic liberal in America, a Trump supporter in America? What's your response to having Satanists rig your election if this is true? And so I just find that it's the internet. What it results in is this purely reactionary undermining of the system, but it seems like almost impossible to form a coherent world picture which can actually replace it someday.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think a lot of it is because things have just gotten, in many ways, too big. Nationalism is, I guess, by definition, it needs to be focused on a particular nation. It's hard to have a international nationalist movement. I mean, you can cross-pollinate some of your ideas or your thoughts, or systems that might work with each other. But at the end of the day, each solution has to, by its very definition, be localized. And so I think because so many people across so many nations, I get people from the UK, I get people from South Africa who want to talk about kind of, neo-reaction and the stuff that I spend most of my time on my channel about, because they see similar patterns. But of course, at the end of the day, those solutions have to be centered on their own countries. In many ways, I think just the US is too large to even have one solution anymore, because the value structures and the situations are just, what does someone in California, Florida, New York, and Texas have in common? Pretty much nothing. And so in many ways, the right will reach out to other people across the pond, like we're doing right now, because we share a issue. We look at the same problem, and we both see it as a problem, and we both have, some thoughts about it. But like I said, you might fall down in one corner. I may, someone like me and Distributist might be more focused, more on religious aspects of culture. but at the end of the day, our solutions have to be more localized. Do you think that while the internet and online populism can be useful in kind of making people aware of some of this stuff, that at the end of the day, those movements are going to have to localize to move forward? Or do you think that, I have heard people like the Distributive say, look, this has gone global for the left, and at some point, in some way, it has to go global for the right. Do you think the answer is figuring out and working out everything globally on the right, or do you think that it, by definition, does have to localize?
Well, I think as a nationalist, it obviously is local, but then even just in sort of British populism, it's already beyond the capability to form a coherent resistance against the system as it is. And so what you end up with is having a multitude of different competing sort of grouplets, which are mainly internet based, and they'll agree with each other that the say Boris Johnson and the Tory parties are well, they won't even do that. So you'll get some which are more sympathetic to the Tories because they're better than Labour, just to pick this as an example. But then you're also going to get some, like, say, Patriotic Alternative, who view the Tories as being more of a threat than Labour because they soak up nationalist energy. So even within that paradigm, you still have the fault lines reappearing. And what it ends up is again, it's just like these endless kind of flame wars on the internet and the echo chambering of ideas. And so when I was looking at this, and I was thinking that mainly the problem is that the information on the internet is rhizomatic, that it isn't, it sort of contains ideas and walls them off, and then you end up with these like a multitude of like little fortresses blasting, like on the, what was it, Judge Dredd, when they have those tower blocks which are at war and they fire at each other. This is what ends up, and so we can undermine the system as a whole and sort of breed doubt and a little bit of paranoia, which, let's be honest, is kind of justified. But then how do we actually overcome all of these distinctions, all of these barriers?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the things you and I were talking about before, in the backstage before we went live, is that one of the problems that the right faces is that, the left, of course, is in control of all your consensus making apparatus. It's also in control of all of your data collection. So news, science, education, it's all flowing through their lens, which means that the right can look at something and say, it stinks, right? There's a problem, there's an issue. We can see that something isn't being told truthfully, but we have trouble collecting information of our own, right? Like, it's hard to go out there and get the raw data out, go out there and get reliable sources of information, and so one of the problems that the right has is oftentimes it's simply saying, look, this is wrong, this is fishy. We can pull up maybe some data here and there, but it's hard to consistently get reliable information to put together a good counter narrative, which means instead of getting one solid response from the right collectively, what you end up with is 15 different narratives, 2 of which have good truth to them, 13 of which are basically just conspiracy theories or cobbled together ideas, and it drowns out the ones that could actually fight back against what the progressives are pushing.
Yeah, this is true. I mean, like we were saying before we went live as well, that we can think, okay, we have this problem with the internet. How is it over on the left? Now, they have a few of their own schisms. With you'll see the sort of the Bolshevik types that are just straightforward Marxist socialist types. There's a lot of them pretty pissed off that they've been forced into a mode where they're supporting Biden. But overall, their sort of their meta-narrative, if you like, is actually constructed by the system itself. And they, as you say, they have access to all of the authority. If you watch debates with, say, Destiny and Vouch and these types, they are constantly pulling on statistics and sources from an authority, which we know is like anti right-wing or anti-nationalist or anti-white. So they have all of this stuff to fall back on, and it's as if everything's been created for them, and they are just like these clockwork toys which have been wound up and set into the discourse. So we don't have that either. We don't have that to fall back on in terms of putting our stuff forwards. I agree. I don't know what the solution is to that. You can, I mean, say Academic Agent is in the chat there, sets up his own online university courses, which is great, but will that be accepted by the mainstream? You know, it's a good start, don't get me wrong, but this is the problem that we're in. It's like an appeal to authority, but the authority hates us.
Yeah, and I think that that's always going to be a fight. I think, of course, half the purpose of university, I mean, half, 90% of the purpose of universities and that kind of thing right now is the credentialism. And so while we do talk a lot about parallelism, especially kind of over in the in the NRX corner, and I think that's why it's great what AA is doing, because I think that is exactly what we've been talking about and exactly what does need to happen. But that doesn't mean that tomorrow it'll be taken as authoritative. And that's, I think you're right, that's always going to be a struggle with parallel institutions, is they're going to be fighting for credibility. But one of the things you're banking on, I guess, at the end of the day, is that work that works will be better than that which does not. If the left keeps producing garbage that collapses in front of people under some inspection, what you're hoping is that eventually people start to look for alternative truth-making apparatus. And if you have something like what AA is building, that does so, then I think you're going to see a shift to looking to those sources. And that's, I hope, in some way what we're providing. I'm not a data-minded individual, but I do know that we have a lot of people who are. And one of the great things is that while we might not be able to get out there and create studies of our own and foreign bureaus and that kind of thing, data is something that we often do have access to. We are often able to look at raw data, and the power of the internet, autism can often allow people to comb through that data and find things that do question the validity of stories. Like you said, unfortunately, right now, that's mostly just planting doubt in kind of the cathedral narrative. But I do hope long term that does allow us to eventually provide a more coherent one from the right. But I think that you are correct that currently, with the many different, I guess, places that people are coming from and the solutions that they're looking at, it can be difficult to see those moving in a direction that really provides a true opposition. But I guess the point is you have to start somewhere, and this is better than not at all, which I'm sure you agree with. I doubt you disagree with that.
It's just like what we were saying before we went live as well, that it interested me at the beginning of the year when I upset a lot of people, because the people were saying, you've got to come out against this COVID stuff. It's obviously a big scam. There is no virus, and it's connected to the 5G networks. And look, at the end of the day, I'm just a normal bloke in the Northeast. I'm not a specialist on like diseases and viruses, but the expectation was that I instantly sort of form my own understanding of the COVID disease based on the fact that the mainstream is saying one thing, then therefore I had to instantly counteract it or sort of debunk it and disbelieve it and come out against it for the simple fact that that's what the mainstream was saying. And this raises some interesting questions, because then it's like, based on what? And then there'll be 20 different people saying 20 different things. So which one do I pick? And this is why it's the internet, and it's a bit like what I was saying about the BitChute videos, or it also affects discourse around politics. The anti-cathedral politics on the internet is in amongst all this like a multitude, like this rhizomatic, tangled mess of different ideas and different narratives. So which ones do we then pick and which ones do we reject. And so this is similar in the end to all of these ideologies. So each ideology, I'm like really sort of basic. I don't get hung up on economics very much because it's a lot of battles that I don't really want to have to get into. But I will stay on the ethno-nationalist principle because I just can't get around the fact that my group is disappearing. So I can't budge on that. But then I kind of lost my train of thought there. But do you see where I'm coming from? So when we go on from that, even in my own circles, then people will say, okay, so we've begun on the principle that our group has to survive. It therefore makes sense to copy an ideology from the continent 70 or 80 years ago because they also had some success with that. And then there'll be other people saying in Britain, then that particular ideology is not ours. We are British, and we are against that. And so then leading on from those two will be two or three other new ideologies and narratives coming off. So it is like this endless rhizomatic problem.
Yeah, and we see this. I'm certainly more over in the I guess religious tradition side of the right rather than the ethno-nat. But at the same time, we have similar problems. You'll see everything's got to be Catholic or everything's got to be. We have there's a group especially on Twitter of Mormons, like super based Mormons, who pop up in those circles. And then I'm Southern Baptist, so I don't even know where I fit in with some of those. But you'll see the same thing even in that end of the same of the spectrum. You'll see these different interests rise, and I wonder if some of this isn't that it has to localize in some sense, because I guess if you were in real life, you would be forced to work things like this out to move forward, right? Like if you were in a traditional political movement, you'd have to in real life, face to face, you'd have to hash these things out, get as close as you can, and then move forward. And because there's nowhere to run, like your group is too small. One of the problems of the internet is there's infinite places to run, right? Like no one is forced to make a decision and bind together in a cause and move forward, because you can always just fracture back into your group. You can always just get a little bit smaller, you can just find a few more people who disagree with you and build a community around that. And in some ways that's good because it allows those movements to look at themselves and build and grow. But at the same time, it also keeps anything from getting particularly building momentum, because at the end of the day, if enough people just start disagreeing one way or another, just break it apart and scatter it and retreat back to a different corner of the internet, and you can put together your non-effective political movement but be ideologically pure, right, at the end of the day.
That's exactly it. So what's bizarre is that on the one hand we have this amazing tool of the internet, and yet increasingly it's as if it's a liability to forming some sort of actual functioning resistance to the system.
Yeah, I think that is correct. And like I said, while I'm glad that we have these opportunities and have these discussions, because I've certainly learned well more than about this stuff than I ever would have if I had just been stuck in my small corner of the United States with the people I know. I mean, it's hard to find 5 people who I can have discussions on some of this stuff with, and so the internet certainly makes that available and lets me learn and grow. But at the end of the day, I think it has to become more localized, because if it doesn't, there's no way to actually get people to work together towards something. I think it's super valuable to have these resources. I think it's super valuable for me to be able to speak with you and AA and guys in South Africa like Morning Shot, and being able to talk to all those people, and because especially in South Africa, they're so much further down the road than we are. They're actually, I think that they have been making some interesting strides in parallelism that we haven't, because we just haven't had to. We just haven't been forced into the necessity yet. But because of their situation, they're making strides in that area that people on the right here in America have only vaguely talked about. And so I do think there's a lot to learn, and I think it's very valuable to have the discussions. But I don't know that we're ever going to see the online right actually coalesce into one thing that pushes forward. Though I think, like I was saying in the chat there, the ability to give each other credibility. If you trust one source, you can talk to another, and you're building that network of trust, even if it's international, even if you and I might disagree on certain things. Just be able to say, hey guys, if you want an interesting perspective, you can go to Morgoth, or you can go to AA, or you can go to Distributist. And I think that is valuable on the whole, especially for a lot of people who do feel alienated inside their own communities because they don't have that option.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would agree with that. He certainly knows more than I do. He's an academic and authority and all of that. That's his thing. So yeah, I mean, just more generally on the internet, another thing that it does is just like creates this weird kind of porridge of information and data. There's an interesting a leftist called Mark Fisher who committed suicide. I mean, he was like really black-pilled about things, but he pointed out that, and I've heard people like John David Ebert point out as well, that if you notice the culture, the general culture of the West for the last 20 years has just been like rubbish, complete rubbish, and nothing can actually. Nothing new is being done. If you look at movies, it's just endless comic book movies. And the point is that I think in the general culture itself that the internet is having an effect. And one of the reasons put up for that is that everything is just this big soup of information. And so, if I go on my YouTube home screen, there'll be a mixture at the moment of synthwave. There'll be some Wagner there. There'll be the sort of political channels that I'm signed up to. There's a Norwegian survivalist, Bjorn Hansen, who I like to watch. But then he'll also be mixed up with a film analysis of, let's say, Zulu, and then so you've got all of these things. Now, in the past, before the internet, they would all be distinctive cultural forms, which would be much further apart from each other. And what the internet does is kind of just grab everything and kind of squeeze it and pulp it. And so it's nothing more than like a little square to be clicked on. And I think it makes it impossible. You can see why we have like postmodernism, because all of the different cultural forms are just sort of pulped into this porridge. It's quite horrible when you begin to understand it. And I think this is the same thing, the same process, which is happening with politics, with the different political factions. So, like you were saying earlier, if you want to be if you want to be like even more hardcore than what certain groups in the 1930s were, you can on the internet. You can. It's all there waiting. Every ideology is waiting, and yet none of it ever manifests itself in the real world.
Yeah, and there's a problem with that, because you do need that self-regulation. You do need that cultural regulation, because you need to know what's possible inside your community. And without that influence, without that governing influence, I think a lot of people will just get lost in that melee of ideas. But I think we're in danger of kind of retreading that a little too much. So before we do that, I do want to also talk to you a little bit about kind of what do you think populism looks like post-Trump. I know a lot of people are still hoping that Trump will pull this out. I certainly think that would be a much better outcome. I would like to see that get worked out. I am unfortunately doubtful that Trump is going to be able to make the moves he needs to make that happen. So I'm not here to blackpill anybody who's still on the Trump train. I hope he does figure it out, but I don't know that I don't think he's really willing to cross the Rubicon in the way many people hope. But that said, if we do end up in kind of I think in many ways, obviously, like, many people have drawn the Brexit Trump analogy, and I think for good reason, because it does show that pushback. What does it look like when we see kind of Trump, if we see Trump exit the stage? What does that look like? Because so many people who are even outside the US do see Trump as a rallying cry for populism. Do you think it goes back into the desert? Do you think that it finds a manifestation in another politician? What do you think happens to kind of online right-wing populism if they don't kind of have Trump to coalesce around?
Well, from my perspective, far away from America, it would seem to me like that the populist energy is not going to go anywhere, and I don't think it's going to sort of define itself into some clear white nationalism because of the reasons that we've discussed for the last half hour or so. And so what this will lead to is a kind of reactionary, all-encompassing anti-system populism, which will probably manifest itself through the Nick Fuentes, Alex Jones type characters who are becoming more and more popular in America. I see them as inheriting all of that. Now, a lot, again, like, people will wince and they'll say, well, they think this, they think that. But at the end of the day, and probably for what you were saying before, the fact is they are like actually out there. So that makes it more real. People can get behind that. They're driving through the streets in that big weird tank thing. And so on the right, I see that kind of populism sort of surviving Trump and becoming probably heavily censored, probably clamped down on by the system, which will just sort of energize them more because it'll be like they're proven correct. But then I think on the left, there's going to be its own fracturing because of the whole problem is that Biden is just the globalist man, the globalist guy. And if Trump managed to stay in power, then, I don't know. We're in uncharted territory there. Because then it really is like I know it's been bandied around quite a bit recently, the Caesar thing, but then we really are in uncharted territory about what the system would do, which is why they just can't let it happen. And it's again, you see where the system is just going to create the discourse for the left to abide by. It's as if it's illegitimate. And you can see that they're saying because of so much of Trump's support is online and these sources are online and things, that they're easily, they'll just kind of write everything off as being an internet conspiracy theory because they are actually on the television in the front room. They have got the newspapers. They have got the blue ticks on Twitter. So you've got this, like, they are still the authority. And it's like a question of, it's like the immovable object meets the, how does that phrase go again?
Unstoppable force meets an immovable object.
Yeah, that's kind of the territory we're moving into. We're going to find out.
Yeah, I think we are seeing, it's interesting because, like you said, the left narrative is almost on rails automatically. I do see a lot of the kind of more dissident left having trouble. I'm actually ending up with some more dissident left followers on Twitter just because at the end of the day, they're as fed up, but it is getting harder and harder for them to keep pretending like at some point Bernie's going to break through and rescue them from that. But I do think you're right about where the right would end up. And actually, there's a super chat here we could look at real quick that's kind of germane to this. This Conscious Fire says, can we have influencers sponsor IRL conferences? And I think you're probably going to see, Nick Fuentes and those kind of people continue to do that. I mean, many of us are behind an avatar for a reason. I think they're, probably not going to see some of that from different corners of the right, but you do have people who are popular who could get stuff like that going. I mean, guys like Carl Benjamin, who are popular and probably do have that. But I guess I worry about conferences as just turning things into grifting opportunities. Like, not that I think it is useful. I think that those meetup opportunities do give people a chance to see that they're not alone and that kind of thing. But at the same time, you don't want to just turn it into a dissident machine where you just get enough people who disagree with the system together to pay entrance fees to tickets to hear people tell them what they want to hear, rather than actually, I guess, get something together. I don't know if that makes sense.
I mean, I don't think they have to be like big swanky affairs, because the things that I'm sure we've all watched them many times, are the Jonathan Bowden speeches, and they've got this certain look to them, which where he's standing in a pub in Hull, and you can see the wallpapers falling off the wall behind him, and it's like the really basic working class pub, and he's standing there like giving a lecture about Heidegger or something. And like everybody on the right in Britain, at least, and I think much further away afield, has all kind of got into that. They all kind of absorb that, and I like that kind of thing. I don't think it has to be a big posh thing, but I mean, in case of in America, yeah, I mean, like Alex Jones and Fuentes could probably fill a football stadium if he gets 50,000 live on D Live, a heavily promoted event. Some of these internet figures have the potential to fill a stadium full of people. Now, that then becomes something which is genuinely, maybe we've been a little bit black-pilled, but in that instance, that would be something which had transformed from the internet into something quite powerful in the real world. I think maybe it's the sort of the ideological purity is the problem with the internet, where you can nitpick at every tiny little thing. What you could say, at the end of the day, what matters is getting your hands on the levers of power, because it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter how well crafted your particular niche ideology is. If it just stays on the internet forever, then it's not really of any use.
Yeah, I'm big on this because Moldbug points this out in some of his writings and stuff too. Is the right is so interested in like exercising what the tiny infinitesimal piece of power it has, that it doesn't understand what the left understands, that the way to actually be able to exercise power is to accrue enough of it first. And so you see a lot of people chasing their own tail. This is why I don't spend a lot of time. Like, do I have disagreements with right-wing content creators? Yeah, tons of them. But like, I just don't spend a lot of time hacking apart this kind of stuff, because at the end of the day, this is not going to get people where it needs to go. Like, if I find something truly, I don't know. It seems like the infighting is the huge waste of time. The purity spiral is the biggest waste of time, and finding a way, to get people excited and moving forward, and building a network and alternative power base seems way more important than, I don't know, trying to drive all that purity down. But one more thing I wanted to get to before I start working through super chats, because I didn't want to keep you too long, is kind of COVID. Obviously, this is an arm of kind of what we've been seeing with the cathedral and globalists, and kind of what they're planning to do next. And I have a buddy who just got back from the UK about a month ago. He was working over there for the last couple of years, and he said the lockdowns are just absolutely insane. Like, we think things are crazy here in America, but I'm in a relatively less lockdown part of America. I know in the UK they can be absolutely ridiculous. What do you see going forward with kind of populists and lockdowns? We've seen large protests in a number of countries, but do you think that this is something that they're going to be able to continue to leverage on people? Do you think the pushback's going to be too much? I think a lot of people thought that once you kind of saw Trump out of the picture, you'd see these things ratcheted down, but it looks like Biden, when he thinks he's winning, wants to ratchet them up, and a lot of other countries' leaders are looking at the same thing. what do you think that's going to look like going forward?
I think it's going to increase, and I'm actually quite optimistic that this can be overcome. And mainly the reason for that is if we have a look at the other things, how the cathedral boxes in right wing thinking is to stigmatize it and call it a phobia. It's essentially, and it's an old trick, but it's to pathologize whether it's whatever trait it is, whatever argument the right will come up with, you'll find that it's some sort of, it's been pathologized by the system. In the case of the COVID and the lockdowns, and they haven't had time to do that. I'm kind of on board with the idea that it's opportunistic, and because of that, it means they haven't had time to spend years kind of grinding into people, the giving them this social stigma about whatever it would happen to be, about being dutifully distancing from other people, or that if you're not distancing and you're not wearing your mask and you're not abiding by the rules, then you are somehow mentally ill. They haven't actually had time to do all of that. And so people don't feel guilty about going out and protesting against the police because there's nothing really there except the system itself, except just brute force. Whereas on a lot of the other issues, they've spent a long time kind of basically just brainwashing people and molding how people think. They haven't had time to do any of that on COVID, which is why just yesterday we see riots on the streets of London and on Paris because of this. There isn't really very many mental hurdles, mental blocks that stand in the way of this. It's just an outright sort of they're just defying the system outright on that issue.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. I think that's an interesting point, that the fact that it is so opportunistic means that they're simply kind of using leftover mechanisms to enforce it because they see that opportunity, but they did not lay as much groundwork as they normally would be able to. So you see them just leaning into like, you've got to trust the science, and everybody who disagrees is the science denier, and you don't want to be a sinner is what they mean, right? Like you don't want to be seen as a science denier. You don't want to, they're just leaning on some credentialism and some leftover stuff that they had laying around to try to enforce this stuff. But it is sloppy, and it is a lot of naked flexes of power, especially I wonder how many times Americans especially can watch like our governors talk about the importance of a lockdown and how you have to cancel Thanksgiving and Christmas, and your kids can never see another child ever again if it's not through a camera. And then the elites just go and like have dinners at swanky restaurants and invite their families over, and like these people are getting caught literally every day doing this stuff. And I feel like it has to add up. Like at some point, it's clearly just saying like, no, plebs, you sit down and consume in your box. We'll do what we want, and you'll listen because we told you so. Like that has to chafe people eventually.
Yeah, I was just looking at on the Twitter, browsing through, from my dead account. That's the on the orgy bargy, which was happening in London yesterday. I noticed that the usual blue tick influencers were calling them far right protests, and I thought it's really it's so incomprehensible, because these are the same people who will also call Boris Johnson like a crypto fascist. And here their kind of narrative on the COVID lockdown situation is that the Conservatives haven't done enough. They haven't gone far enough with this stuff. So they have to attack them like what? Where from? Like to say, well, he just doesn't care about the people. And so they're trying that basically it's just whatever the system wants to have happen. They've got these kind of midwit influencers to carry water for them on any single issue. And so they call these people who are actually saying, we want freedom, we want liberty. And you've got, you've got like the police, like beating them up with their truncheons and carrying like middle-aged women, or like throwing them into the back of meat wagons and driving away. And yet the anti-fascists, the people who think like Boris Johnson is a crypto fascist, Boris Johnson, they're looking at the police do that, but in this particular instance, then it's nothing to do with fascism in their framing then as being this total. Then all of a sudden that evaporates, and it's the people who are actually doing the protesting are the far right fascists. It's just insane. It's how this is what we're dealing with these people.
Yeah, one of the most amazingly dystopian things I've ever seen was a couple days ago. We had I forget which state it is, but there's a Republican governor who is saying that his state is going to have public schools basically interrogate children when they come back from Thanksgiving break to see if they had family over, and then quarantine all the children who saw family, which is just absolutely insane. And of course the left is on board with this, right? Like, this is fine. Like, this is public health. You can, like, you literally are using agents of the state to interrogate 7-year-olds to see if you need to lock them down, so that they can, if you're not snitching on your family, how can you fight the fascists, right? It is an absolutely amazing thing. But yeah, like I said, I didn't want to keep you, I know you got places to be, so I want to get through some of the super chats here. We had Lewis for £5. He said, copy what the AFD in Germany is doing right now. If you're needing information, you can go check out Right Wing Reaction. I'm not super familiar with German politics, but thank you for the super chat, and you guys should definitely Right Reaction. He's got some interesting stuff over there. He's had me and Charlemagne and some other people on, so he's definitely a good channel to look at. And let me see, I know there was another one here real quick. Someone with super sticker. Thank you, Steve Sterling, for the donation. I'm not sure if that's just, I'm not sure how super stickers work. I'm sorry. I'm relatively new to YouTube through all this, so if I'm being horribly unprofessional about super chats or super stickers, I'm sorry. But thank you very much for the donation. We really appreciate it. Oh, sorry. But yeah, that was more or less everything I had. Was there anything that we didn't get to that you wanted to talk about, Morgoth, when it came to kind of populism or COVID that we were going over?
No, not really. I mean, I've kind of said these things quite a few times throughout the year, but it was I just think the video on the recent one on populism and the internet was also just sort of, I noticed the same patterns as at the beginning of the year with the COVID, where the COVID thing coming out, where it's like, how do we actually establish a grounding truth on the internet? I mean, I'm surprised that more people didn't pick up on it, but maybe a discussion for the other time. But the obvious, and distributors came on under the video and said it was an excellent video, because what you can then do is say, well, Christianity could actually be this umbrella thing if we by and large, yeah. So, but it does open up a lot of bigger discussions.
Yeah, I mean, this is always the hope. I mean, this is the hope that probably me and distributists have, that I don't know, not everybody's on board with, but yeah, Christendom really is. That's what I'm fighting for. That's what I think is I think can provide that overarching, that binding narrative. That's always what it has been. That's been of the amazing things that it has done. That has been one of them. So certainly, I hope that is. I see that as a great opportunity, and I think something that can move the right forward together, unified, even as we recognized each other's different nationalist movements are going to have necessarily different end goals because of because they are nationalists, because each nation is different. I think the overarching thing that can bind us together, I hope would be Christianity. I know many people have issues with that. All right, I know there are other people who do get hung up on that, but I think that is a great opportunity in the end for bringing people together.
Yeah, so like, even so, as a nationalist, I'll call out when people will say it's like foreign. And now this I find to be quite ridiculous, because at the end of the day, all art, all metaphysics, all musical forms, even how we understand ourselves and as Europeans in the world is like is comes from Christianity. So you can't. You once again you're going to be left with this sort of standing on nothing position and looking back in at you're looking back in and critiquing on something, but from a position of nowhere. And again, just I'd like to see that sort of done away with as well. We have to accept the past. I find it. I can't understand that. That thinking at all. I mean, I am a bit of a Spangler nut, and it's you can't actually escape your primal form. And I find it easier if we just accept that and then go on with it. Instead, I mean, there's people on you get like people on Twitter inventing whole new religions. It's ridiculous.
Yeah, I actually just started reading Spangler. I've heard, of course, a ton about him, but I'm like maybe 40 or 50 pages into Decline. So I'm looking forward to that because I've heard a lot of good stuff, but my reading list has stacked up quite a bit. Lewis, I do want to say thanks for that, but I'm going to avoid putting that super chat on just because I want to avoid any censorship from YouTube. So I am kind of careful about everything I put out there. But thank you very much for that super chat. I appreciate it. And guys, I want to thank everybody for coming by. We've had a lot of great discussion, a lot of people in the comments making good points. And of course, I really want to thank Morgoth for coming on. It's somebody whose work I really enjoy, and I think it's very valuable. Again, I can't imagine people aren't subbed, but if for some reason they aren't, go ahead and go fix that, especially BitChute. That's something that I need to get into because, like, just mentioned, the censorship is real and probably going to intensify. And so, putting your toes, my problem is, learning one platform was enough for me, but I do need to make that effort because I think that is a good effort. So Morgoth, thanks so much for coming on, man. I really appreciate it.
No problem. I enjoyed it. I will say, sign up to BitChute because YouTube is just throttling my channel. It's like pushing a boulder uphill at the moment. I know it just disappears from the algorithm after 6 hours or something. But I'll keep plugging away on BitChute once they take me off of YouTube, I suppose. And if it comes to it, I'll just go back to blogging. But thanks for listening, everyone.
All right, everybody, have a good one. We appreciate you coming by. If you haven't hit subscribe yet for my channel, please go ahead and do so. We really appreciate it, and we'll talk to you next time.